It was my cousin Ellie this time. Growing up, she was more like my sister. We'd spent every summer together, gotten into our fair share of trouble, and shared every secret. But after college, life happened, and we started drifting apart a bit. She moved to a different city, got a job she loved, and seemed to be thriving. Still, we kept in touch, meeting up whenever we could. I'd always looked up to her, seeing her as the cool cousin who had it all figured out. That's why I was surprised when she called me a few weeks ago, sounding off. She didn't say much, just asked if I was free to hang out for the weekend. She didn't want to go out anywhere, just said she needed some time away. I didn't ask questions, just said yes and told her to come on over. When Ellie arrived, she looked different. Her usual bright, chatty self was muted, her smile barely there, and there were bags under her eyes that concealer wasn't hiding. I figured something was up, but I decided to wait and let her open up on her own. I made her tea, got her comfortable, and we ended up watching an old sitcom marathon, barely talking. She laughed at the screen, but there was a heaviness behind it that she couldn't mask. The next morning, I went to grab us breakfast, and when I came back, she was out on my balcony, staring at her phone with this haunted look. She was holding her head, muttering under her breath, and I could see she was holding back tears. I put down the food and went to her, trying to keep my voice light. "Hey, you good?" She looked at me with watery eyes, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff. Stressful week." She tried to laugh it off, but her voice broke a little. That's when I noticed her phone screen. It was open to her bank account, and from the looks of it, things were tight. Really tight. My heart sank. Ellie had always been smart with money, but it looked like she was barely scraping by. She caught me glancing at her phone and quickly turned it off, looking defensive. I hesitated, then said softly, "Ellie, are you struggling with money? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I noticed. You just look really stressed." She stiffened, her face going from hurt to annoyed in a second. "So, you're looking over my shoulder now? What, are you checking up on me?" "No, it wasn't like that," I said quickly, feeling myself flush. "I'm not snooping. You seemed upset, and I wanted to know if there's anything I can do to help." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Right? Help? Because you think I can't handle it? That's not it at all," I said, feeling defensive. "I'm just worried about you. You've been here less than a day, and it's obvious something's weighing on you. If things are rough, you don't have to face it alone." She looked away, a bitter edge in her voice. This is exactly why I didn't want to talk about it. I knew you'd start treating me like some kind of failure or something." "Ellie, that's not what I'm saying," I said, feeling the frustration building. "I don't think you're failing. I just don't want you to go through this by yourself. I've got some savings. I could help with the bills, just to ease some of the pressure." She let out a sharp laugh, but it sounded almost like a sob. "I don't need your savings, okay? Just because I'm going through a rough patch doesn't mean I'm helpless. I came here to get away, not to be reminded of everything that's going wrong." I fell silent, her words stinging in ways I hadn't expected. All I'd wanted was to be there for her, the way she'd always been there for me. I thought maybe she'd feel relieved, that she'd be able to open up and let some of the weight off her shoulders. But it seemed like every word I said only made her angrier, more defensive. After a long pause, I managed to say, "I'm sorry, Ellie. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I just hate seeing you like this." She didn't respond, just gave me a tight-lipped nod, her face a mixture of anger and hurt. For the rest of the weekend, things felt awkward, like there was this wall between us that neither of us knew how to break down. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd messed up by bringing it up, by making her feel exposed and judged. When she left, we hugged, but it felt hollow. I thought I was helping, but now I'm left questioning everything. Maybe I should have just let her have her space instead of trying to play rescuer. Now, all I feel is this ache in my chest and a sinking worry that I've only pushed her further away. Alright, here's what happened at my cousin Leah's wedding last weekend. I honestly thought I was just being supportive, but by the end of the night, it felt like everyone was looking at me like I was some kind of villain. So, here's the story, and you tell me if I'm the bad guy here. Leah and her now husband Mark have been together for a couple of years, and I've always been really close with Leah. She's one of those people who's always dreamed about her wedding. The dress, the flowers, the perfect venue. She's very Pinterest wedding obsessed, and for the last year, the family group chat has been filled with non-stop updates about her wedding plans. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for her, but it felt like her wedding had turned into this massive production, with everyone making it out to be the event of the century. The wedding was held at this super fancy venue that looked like a movie set. The place was covered in roses, there were candles everywhere, and a live string quartet was playing. It was beautiful, and I could tell Leah was on cloud nine. But as I looked around at all the decorations and the 100+ guests, I couldn't help but think about how much this must have cost. Leah and Mark aren't exactly rolling in cash, and I know her parents pitched in a lot. I guess part of me just couldn't get over how extravagant it was. When the ceremony started, Leah looked stunning, and everyone was tearing up as she walked down the aisle. It was honestly beautiful, but the vows, well, let's just say they were very fairy tale-like. Leah and Mark kept going on about how they were each other's one true love and how they'd never felt anything like this before. It was sweet, but also a bit much. I'd had a serious relationship myself, and while it didn't work out, I know what deep love feels like, so I couldn't help but feel like maybe they were idealizing things a bit. After the ceremony, everyone headed to the reception hall, where people started giving toasts. Leah's maid of honor gave a really touching speech about how Leah and Mark are soulmates and how true love is worth any sacrifice. I thought it was nice, but part of me felt like I could add some balance to the conversation, you know? When it was my turn, I raised my glass and said, "To Leah and Mark, finding someone you love is amazing, and I think we all know relationships aren't always like a fairy tale. But you two are clearly in this for the long haul, and I know you'll handle all the ups and downs together." There was this slight pause before everyone clinked their glasses. Leah's smile looked a little strained, but I thought my toast was realistic. I didn't want to be one of those people who pretended marriage was just all roses and rainbows. I mean, aren't we supposed to wish people well while reminding them of the reality? Later, while we were sitting down for dinner, I was chatting with a few other guests, and someone asked me what I thought about the ceremony. I said, "Oh, it was beautiful. A bit over the top maybe, but hey, if that's what makes Leah happy, more power to her." I didn't think it was a big deal, but one of my cousins gave me this weird look and said, "It's her wedding day. Maybe just let her have her moment." I laughed it off, feeling like maybe I was being a bit too honest. So I decided to change the subject and just let it go. But then, as the night went on, I kept hearing all these guests gushing about how Leah and Mark were meant to be, how it was the most perfect love story, and so on. I started feeling like maybe everyone was getting a bit carried away. I mean, they're great together, but I'd had a long-term relationship myself, and love isn't always this fairy tale everyone's talking about. So when I was talking with a few friends at my table, I said, "Leah and Mark are great, but people are acting like they're the only ones who've ever been in love. Real love takes work, and I think it's important they're ready for that." One of my friends raised an eyebrow and said, "You don't think they're ready?" I quickly clarified, "Oh no, that's not what I meant. I'm just saying love isn't always like what people think it is." It's good to remember that. I figured that was fine, but a couple of people just gave me this tight-lipped smile and changed the topic. The real trouble came during the first dance. Leah and Mark were doing their little choreographed routine to some romantic song, and everyone was gathered around watching them. I was standing with my aunt, who was dabbing her eyes, and she sighed and said, "It's like a fairy tale, isn't it?" Now, maybe it was the champagne talking, but I said, "Yeah, it's sweet. But you know, real life isn't always like that. They'll have tough days too. I just hope they're ready for the real stuff once the honeymoon phase wears off." My aunt looked a little taken aback and said, "Can't you just let them have this moment?" And I was like, "Of course. I'm just saying it's good to keep things in perspective." She didn't respond, and after that, she just moved away and started talking to someone else. The night wrapped up, and I thought everything was fine, but the next morning, Leah texted me saying she was hurt by some of my comments. She said it felt like I was downplaying her wedding and making it about how love isn't that special. I told her that wasn't my intention at all, and that I was just trying to offer a realistic perspective, especially since marriage isn't easy. But she replied, "It's my wedding day. I didn't need realism. I just wanted to feel special." I honestly don't get it. I thought I was being supportive by sharing advice that might actually be useful down the road. Love is hard work, and I think it's good for people to remember that, especially at the start of a marriage. I didn't think I was saying anything wrong by adding a dose of reality into the mix. But now some of my family members are saying I should apologize for dampening the mood, and that I should have just kept my comments to myself. So, was I really out of line for giving her a little reality check, or is everyone just being overly sensitive? It started out simple enough. My coworker Jake and I work on the same team, and we're usually the last ones in the office at the end of the day. We're both a bit competitive and constantly trying to outdo each other. So one night, when I finished a project before he did, I decided to leave him a little congratulatory surprise. I took a sticky note, wrote "Nice try, loser" on it, and stuck it to his computer monitor. The next morning, I walked into the office to find a neon yellow sticky note on my own monitor that read, "I think you spelled winner wrong." All right, point to Jake. I laughed it off, but I couldn't just let him have the last word. So, I went for round two. I filled his desk drawer with candy wrappers. It looked like he'd had a snack attack at work, and I even threw a few under his chair for good measure. He didn't say anything to me, but later that day, I found my stapler missing. I looked everywhere, but it was gone. I finally found it an hour later, frozen solid in the office break room freezer, encased in a block of ice. Jake was sitting at his desk with the smuggest grin I've ever seen. All right, fine. Game on. The next day, I took every single pen, pencil, and paperclip off his desk and replaced them with crayons. He walked in and sat down, looked at the rainbow assortment of crayons in his pen holder, and just shook his head. "You're a child," he muttered, but I could see the gleam in his eye. By now, everyone in the office knew something was going on, and they'd occasionally walk by to see what new chaos we'd left for each other. Then Jake upped the stakes. One morning, I logged into my computer and saw that my wallpaper had been replaced with a giant, embarrassing photo of me from our last holiday party, where I'd accidentally spilled wine on myself. It was blown up to full screen, and I couldn't delete it fast enough. I shot him a look, but he just grinned and gave me a thumbs up. I knew I had to go bigger. So, I filled his entire cubicle with balloons. I'm talking wall to wall, every inch of his workspace filled. When he showed up, he had to pop his way through them to reach his computer. It took him almost an hour, and the entire office was in on it, laughing as each balloon popped. I figured that would be it. He'd realize I'd won, and we'd call it even. But Jake wasn't giving up. The next day, he convinced IT to redirect every email I sent to him back to my own inbox. So every time I tried to email him, I'd get an instant response from myself. It took me hours to figure out what was going on, and by then, I was too embarrassed to admit that he'd tricked me. I had to beg IT to reverse it, and the guy in charge just shook his head and said, "Seriously, you two need to chill." But there was no way I was letting him off that easy. I waited until our monthly team meeting, when I knew Jake would be presenting. Before he started, I handed out Jake's presentation bingo cards to the entire team. Each card had phrases Jake tended to overuse to piggyback off that synergy, "let's circle back," and so on. I whispered to everyone to check off each phrase as he said it. I figured Jake would notice and laugh, but I didn't realize just how seriously he took his presentations. Halfway through, he noticed people whispering and looking at their cards, and his face flushed. By the end, he was so flustered that he wrapped up in record time, barely able to finish his points. Afterward, he cornered me by the coffee machine. "That was low," he muttered, but I just grinned. The next day, I came in to find my desk completely empty. Every item, my keyboard, mouse, even my chair, had been relocated to the supply closet. I spent the first hour of my morning dragging everything back, with Jake just watching, smirking from his cubicle. It was exhausting, but I wasn't giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. And then, I went nuclear. That weekend, I spent hours creating an elaborate fake Employee of the Month certificate, complete with a ridiculous photo of Jake wearing a party hat, a mustache drawn on in permanent marker. On Monday, I printed it out and framed it, hanging it in the break room for everyone to see. By lunch, the entire office was buzzing about Employee of the Month Jake. I thought he'd find it funny, but when he saw it, he just stared at it for a long time. After work, he called me out in the parking lot. "Look, I get it, we're both having fun," he said, sounding more serious than I'd ever heard him. "But maybe we should stop. This is getting a little too much." I laughed, brushing it off, but a small part of me knew he was right. I just couldn't resist one last jab. "So, I replaced his nameplate with one that read, Prank King. I thought he'd get a kick out of it, but when he saw it, he sighed and shook his head. All right, that's it, he said, and the next day, I found my desk covered in baby powder. He'd rigged my overhead fan to release a cloud of it the moment I turned it on. I was coated head to toe, coughing and spluttering, while the whole office watched. He looked over at me and said, "We're done." Agreed. Covered in powder, I had to admit defeat. I raised my hands in surrender. Agreed. The pranks ended there, but things felt tense afterward. It was like we'd crossed a line without meaning to, and the whole office now saw us as those two. Our boss even called us both in, giving us a lecture on workplace professionalism. Neither of us really laughed about the pranks anymore, and even though we're still friends, there's an awkwardness that wasn't there before. Looking back, I wonder if I went too far. Maybe I should have backed down when he hinted he was done, or maybe it was that employee of the month thing. Either way, I'm stuck wondering if I took it too far, or if he just couldn't handle a little Alright, here's how what seemed like a simple loan has pretty much ruined my friendship with my buddy Matt over $600. Matt and I have been close for years. He's practically my brother at this point. So, when he came to me saying he was in a bind with his rent, I didn't even question it. He asked to borrow $600 to cover an unexpected shortfall, promising to pay me back as soon as possible. We didn't set up a formal repayment plan, mostly because he swore he'd have it back to me within a month, 2 tops. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he'd come through. But as weeks turned into months, I started getting a little uncomfortable. Each time I'd bring it up casually, he'd give me the same line, "I haven't forgotten, man. I just need a bit more time." I didn't want to be pushy, but it started to bother me when I'd see him posting on social media about his nights out, his new gaming setup, or a pair of expensive sneakers he'd been eyeing. Still, I kept my cool, assuming he'd handle it. But by the end of the second month, I was getting anxious. $600 is a lot of money for me, and I was starting to cut back on my own spending because of it. I sent him a message saying, "Hey, any update on that loan? I'd really appreciate it if you could get it back to me soon." He responded with a long text about how money's been tighter than expected and that he appreciated my patience. He ended with a vague, "I'll get it to you, don't worry." But at this point, I was starting to worry. Then came the kicker. About a week later, a few friends invited us all out to celebrate Matt's new job offer. He showed up late, strutted in with this huge grin, and announced that the first round was on him. I thought, okay, maybe he's just excited, but by the end of the night, he'd ordered drinks for everyone, bought a few rounds, and was going on about his treat-yourself philosophy. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was literally paying for everyone's drinks while I sat there, still waiting on my $600. I didn't want to make a scene, but when we were alone, I pulled him aside and said, "Matt, if you're able to cover everyone's drinks tonight, maybe you could start paying me back?" He looked at me like I was out of line and laughed it off, saying, "Come on, man, it's just one night. Don't be weird about it." I told him I wasn't trying to be weird, but that it had been months, and I felt like he was ignoring the fact that he still owed me. He sighed and said, "I get it, but real friends don't stress over money like this. You should trust that I'll pay you back." That comment made me feel like I was the bad guy for even asking. Since then, things have been awkward. He's told some mutual friends that I'm pressuring him and taking it too seriously. A couple of them even told me maybe I should cut him some slack. Meanwhile, I'm left here wondering if I was wrong to even ask him that night, or if he's just taking advantage of my patience. It's strange how one decision can stay with you, picking at you long after it's over. I've tried to tell myself that I did nothing wrong, that this was just a small misunderstanding. But then I'll be doing something mundane, washing the dishes or driving to work, and Danny's face will pop into my mind, and I'll get that same dull ache in my chest. I'll think about how sure I'd been that he wouldn't care, that I was making a reasonable choice, that skipping one dinner wasn't a big deal. Now, every time I think about it, I wonder how I could have been so oblivious. Danny was always one of those people who worked quietly, who didn't ask for much. He was so self-sufficient, it was easy to forget that he might want something from me. I had this image of him as the achiever, the one who would always be fine, no matter what. And maybe that's part of why I shrugged off his invitation. I told myself he didn't need me to be there, because he was the strong one. It didn't occur to me that even strong people want someone by their side, That even the ones who never ask for help sometimes need a reminder that their success matters. I keep going back to his message, the one where he said he thought it would mean something to me to be there. And it's like those words are etched into my mind now. It would mean something to me. I was so sure that Danny would understand if I didn't come. But maybe that's the problem. I assumed he'd always understand, that he'd always forgive without asking myself if that was fair to him. Looking back, I can see how much I took for granted. Danny was always supportive, always showing up, even when he didn't have to. I'd been so used to having his support, I just assumed he'd understand my absence too. I figured I was safe in that bond, that missing one night wouldn't make a difference. But it's starting to dawn on me that maybe it wasn't about the one dinner. It was about a pattern, a habit of assuming that he'd always be there, even when I couldn't be bothered to do the same. I can't help but wonder what that night was like for him, surrounded by friends and family, looking around the room, hoping I'd show up, only to feel that empty space where I should have been. It hurts to imagine it, but maybe that's something I need to sit with, the uncomfortable realization that my absence was a kind of betrayal, that it said more about our relationship than any words could. He needed me, and I wasn't there. Now I feel stuck. I want to reach out to him, to apologize, to explain that I finally understand what that night meant, that I'm sorry for failing him. But every time I pick up my phone, I stop, because I'm realizing that words, especially now, might not be enough. What good is saying sorry when what he wanted was my presence, my support, something I can't go back and give him? In some ways, I think I'm more scared of what his silence means than anything else. Danny and I used to talk all the time, even just to check in with each other. But now it's been months, and he hasn't reached out, hasn't tried to break the ice. It's like I became a stranger overnight, and that terrifies me. I always thought that we'd have each other's backs, no matter what. And it's only now that I'm realizing I might have been the one who let that bond slip away. I keep going back and forth in my head, wondering if maybe I'm overthinking this, if maybe he's fine, if maybe this is all in my head. But then I think about his message again, about him telling me how much that dinner meant to him. And I feel this pang of regret, this creeping understanding that maybe I'm only just beginning to see the real consequences of my choice. Maybe he's moving on, accepting that I wasn't there when he needed me, finding new people who'll show up for him the way I couldn't. The worst part is, I can't shake this feeling that I've lost something I'll never get back. That, to him, I'll always be the cousin who couldn't show up for his big moment, who brushed off his achievement as something trivial. And it's only now, with the silence hanging between us, that I understand how much he needed me to see him, to recognize his hard work, to be there without him having to ask. I still want to make things right. I want to tell him that I understand, that I'm sorry, that I wish I could go back. But I don't know if that's possible anymore, and I don't know if I deserve it. Maybe my silence, my absence, my choice to ignore what mattered to him. Maybe all of that speaks louder than any apology I could give. Now, every family gathering feels tense, and every time someone mentions him, I feel that pang of guilt, knowing that I'm the one who messed this up. Part of me wants to hope that he'll forgive me, that he'll eventually see that I'm trying to change. But another part of me knows that some mistakes leave scars, that even when you learn from them, they don't always fade. And I can't shake this question. Was I wrong to think it didn't matter? Or was that just my own selfishness talking, a way of avoiding the truth that I didn't want to be bothered to show up when someone else needed me? About 3 months ago, my friend Alex reached out to me, sounding completely defeated. We'd been good friends in college, but drifted apart after graduation. He's always been a bit of a free spirit, hopping from job to job, moving from city to city. But this time, he was struggling. He'd just lost his job, couldn't keep up with rent, and was feeling down about his options. He asked if he could stay with me just for a few weeks while he regrouped and promised he'd get back on his feet soon. I have a decent job, a quiet place with a guest room, and honestly, I figured I'd want to help if I were in his position. I agreed, hoping I could give him the chance to start fresh. I set up the guest room, even picked up a few groceries I knew he liked. He arrived with a big, grateful hug, saying he didn't know what he'd do without me. It felt good to help a friend out. Plus, Alex is one of those charming, positive people who can always make you laugh, so I thought maybe we'd even have a good time hanging out. The first week was exactly that. He'd go out during the day, saying he was exploring the area, and lining up job leads. We'd spend evenings cooking together, reminiscing about old times, and he'd tell me about interviews he was scheduling. He kept thanking me, saying how he was so close to a breakthrough. I was actually a bit excited to see him pull through. But things changed fast. By the end of the second week, he'd stopped going out during the day and started sleeping in, lounging on the couch all afternoon. When I'd come home from work, he'd still be in his pajamas, surrounded by empty snack bags and cans. I'd ask him how the job hunt was going, and he'd shrug, saying, "I'm taking it slow, waiting for the right opportunity. You can't rush these things." I try to be patient, thinking maybe he needed a little time to bounce back, but every day it was the same thing. The mess started creeping in next. He'd leave dishes piled up in the sink, food wrappers all over the living room, and his clothes tossed around the apartment. One day, I tripped over his shoes, which he'd left in the middle of the hallway, and realized that I was the one cleaning up after him every day. I gently asked him to pick up after himself, and he'd laugh, saying, "Sorry, I'm just in vacation mode." I hoped he'd get the hint, but nothing changed. My apartment, which I kept pretty tidy, started looking like a tornado had passed through. Week 3 was when I realized he wasn't even pretending to job hunt anymore. He'd stay up all night watching movies with the volume cranked up, yelling at the screen like he was in a theater. Then he'd sleep in until noon, barely even acknowledging me when I'd leave for work. The whole place felt tense, like he was here but completely checked out. I brought it up one night, suggesting he consider some short-term work just to keep things moving, and he'd brush me off, saying, "I'm not about to work retail or temp jobs. I need something that'll actually get me somewhere." Meanwhile, he was eating through the groceries like a teenage boy after football practice. I'd buy food for the week, and half of it would be gone in a couple of days. When I asked if he could start contributing, he'd say, "Sure, once I get my first paycheck. You know I'm good for it." But, of course, that paycheck wasn't anywhere in sight. Then there was the car incident. One day, I got home and found my car wasn't parked in its usual spot. I went inside, and he wasn't there either. After about 2 hours, he finally came back, saying he borrowed it to run a quick errand. When I asked him to let me know if he was going to use my car, he laughed and said, "Oh, come on. We're practically like family. I thought it'd be fine." The tank was almost empty, and he'd left a mess in the back seat. I told him that, moving forward, he needed to ask first. He just smirked and muttered, "All right, Dad." By week 5, I'd had enough. I sat him down and told him we needed to talk about a plan for him to move out, or at least start seriously contributing around here. He looked at me, completely taken aback, and said, "Wow, I thought you understood what it means to support a friend. Didn't realize you'd be so quick to turn your back on me." He went on saying, "You don't get it. You've always had things easy with your job and your place. Some of us actually have to work for it." I was stunned. Here I was offering him my home, covering everything from rent to food to utilities, and he was acting like I was somehow betraying him. I told him it wasn't about having it easy. It was about showing some effort and respect for my space. He just shook his head, saying, "Guess I should have known you were too uptight for this." Since then, he's been passive-aggressively taking jabs at me, barely cleaning up and leaving messes everywhere. I can feel the tension every time I walk in the door, and he's making comments like, "Must be nice to live life on easy mode, or not all of us can be so lucky." Meanwhile, he's still sleeping in, using my things, and acting like he's got all the time in the world. It's gone from uncomfortable to downright unbearable, and I'm starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. Part of me feels guilty, like maybe I pushed too hard or didn't set boundaries early enough. But another part of me wonders if he's been taking advantage of me from the start. I never imagined helping a friend would turn into this nightmare. All right, here it is. My boyfriend, Ben, and I are about a month out from moving into our first place together. We've been talking about this step forever, but now that it's actually happening, it's turning out to be way more complicated than I expected. Not because of the actual move, but because we seem to have opposite philosophies on how to handle it. So, I'm a planner. Like a hardcore planner. I've got our moving timeline mapped out, broken into stages with clear deadlines. I have lists of what to pack and when, a budget spreadsheet with everything from movers to pizza for moving day, and an entire folder of notes from researching everything we'll need to know about our new neighborhood. I want things to be as organized and smooth as possible, so we're not scrambling around last minute. Ben, on the other hand, has a, let's just say, loose approach to planning. His motto is basically, we'll figure it out when we get there. He keeps telling me that we should relax and not overthink it, that moving should be natural and fun. Meanwhile, I'm lying awake at night, imagining the chaos of packing the night before, trying to find movers who aren't fully booked, or forgetting essential things. Just thinking about winging it makes me break out in a cold sweat. Our first clash happened when I showed him my moving checklist. I was honestly proud of it, like, look at this. We got a roadmap. But when I handed it to him, he just kind of laughed and handed it back. Wow, babe, he said, grinning. Do we really need all of this? I mean, it's just a move. People do this all the time without turning it into a whole project. I try to keep it light. I know, but having a plan means we won't have to worry about anything. We can just go through the checklist and know we're set. He just shook his head, still smiling. Or we could just pack things up as we go and figure it out when we get closer. Why make it harder than it needs to be? And that's when I realized we were dealing with two very different mindsets. From that point on, every time I brought up something related to the move, it felt like we were on different wavelengths. I'd mention that we should book the movers early to lock in a good rate. And he'd say, why rush? We'll find someone when we're ready. I'd suggest starting to pack up the things we don't use often. And he'd say, we don't need to pack yet. It'll take, what, a day? Finally, I tried to meet him halfway. I told him that I'd take care of the logistical stuff. Finding movers, setting up utilities, organizing the packing timeline. If he wanted to focus on the creative side of things, like figuring out how we'd arrange the furniture and picking out decor. I thought this would be a nice way to split things up, so I could have the structure I needed without putting pressure on him. But he just sighed and shook his head. I don't want to be stuck with just decorating, he said, crossing his arms. This is our move together. I want us both to figure it out as we go. I felt my patience starting to slip. Ben, I'm not trying to take over. I just think that if we don't get some of this in place now, we'll end up stressed out and unprepared when moving day comes. But he wasn't having it. I just don't think everything needs to be planned down to the hour, he argued. Moving is messy. It's supposed to be, and we'll get through it. I just want us to enjoy it without all this pressure. That's the word he kept using, pressure. And it stung, because in my mind, planning wasn't adding pressure. It was reducing it. I'm doing this, so we don't find ourselves up to our necks in cardboard boxes with no idea where anything is. But he seemed to think I was making this way more intense than it had to be. Then a few nights ago, things came to a head. I'd found a reputable moving company that was offering a great deal, and I told him we should book them soon. He looked at me, almost annoyed, and asked, why are we rushing to book movers? We still have plenty of time. I felt my frustration boil over. Because, Ben, if we wait, we could end up paying way more, or even worse, be left without a moving company. This way, we don't have to worry about it later. He shook his head, looking exasperated. You're acting like this is some high-stakes mission. It's a move, not rocket science. We'll get it done, I promise. We ended up sitting in silence, both of us convinced we were right. I wanted to respect his wish to go with the flow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were setting ourselves up for disaster. And it felt like he didn't understand how much my planning was about making sure this move didn't turn into a last-minute scramble. Since then, we've tried to compromise in small ways. He's agreed to let me book the movers in advance if I promise to stop bringing up the moving timeline every other day. I'm trying to ease up, but honestly, I'm still working on my checklist behind the scenes just to keep myself sane. Meanwhile, he's trying to be patient with me, but I can see the way he rolls his eyes whenever I mention something like packing strategy or labeling boxes. At one point, he even joked, if you're this stressed about moving, I can't wait to see you plan a wedding. He laughed, but it honestly stung. I realized that he thought all my organizing was just a weird quirk, not something that actually mattered to me. So here we are, both trying to support each other's way of doing things, but neither of us really letting go of our own approach. Every time I try to loosen up, I picture us knee-deep in unpacked boxes, scrambling to get everything done. And every time he tries to go with my flow, he gets that glazed look like he's counting down the days until he can relax again. Now, I'm starting to wonder if I really am making this more stressful than it needs to be. Am I overthinking it? Should I just try to go with his approach and trust that things will work out? Or is he just being too relaxed for something this important? Every year, my family does a Christmas Eve dinner at my grandparents' house. It's a big deal for us. Cozy, homemade meals, a fireplace, and my grandma's collection of decorations that she's had for years. The tradition has always been to keep it simple, with each of us bringing a dish and then sitting around the table to eat together, followed by a gift exchange and a few rounds of board games. It's classic, predictable, and honestly a little repetitive. This year, though, my grandparents asked me to handle the dinner since they're getting older and wanted a bit of a break. I figured this was my chance to give the tradition a little upgrade, make it feel more exciting and memorable. I wanted to surprise everyone with something different, something they'd remember as the best Christmas Eve ever. So, without telling anyone, I went ahead and booked a private dining room at a really fancy restaurant downtown. It's one of those places with a beautiful holiday setup, professional servers, and a 5-course tasting menu. I thought it'd be a huge treat. I mean, no one would have to cook or clean up, and we'd all get to enjoy a perfectly prepared meal. I even coordinated with the restaurant to have special holiday drinks and desserts. My plan was to keep it a surprise until we all arrived. On Christmas Eve, everyone showed up at my grandparents' house, expecting the usual home-cooked meal. I gathered everyone in the living room and announced, "Surprise!" This year, we're doing something a little different. I made us a reservation at this amazing restaurant downtown. We'll have a beautiful meal, and no one has to lift a finger. I expected everyone to cheer, but instead, the room went quiet. My mom was the first to speak up. "What about all the dishes we prepared? I thought we were having dinner here like always." I tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, we'll save those for tomorrow or pack them up. This is going to be so much more relaxing. You'll love it, I promise." But my grandma looked visibly upset. She said, "But Christmas Eve is supposed to be here with everyone bringing their own special dish. This is how we've always done it." My grandpa just kind of stared at me like he couldn't believe what I'd planned. I thought they were overreacting. "Come on, it's still a family dinner. It's just more elegant. We'll still be together, and we won't have to worry about cooking or cleaning up afterward. Isn't that a nice break?" My dad shook his head and said, "But this is our tradition. It's about all of us contributing to the meal and being here at home together. It doesn't feel the same in some fancy restaurant." Seeing that everyone was still hesitant, I tried to hype them up. "Trust me, you'll love it. This place has amazing food, and they've decorated everything for Christmas. It's going to be beautiful. Just give it a chance." Reluctantly, they all agreed, and we headed to the restaurant. But the atmosphere was off from the start. No one was talking much, and instead of feeling festive, everyone seemed stiff and awkward. My grandparents especially looked uncomfortable. My grandma whispered to my mom, "This just isn't the same. I miss being home with our food." When the first course came out, a small, fancy salad, my dad looked around and muttered, "So this is dinner?" I laughed and explained that it was a tasting menu, so there would be several courses. But he just sighed and said, "I was looking forward to my own cooking, not some tiny fancy plates." As the courses went on, everyone's mood only got worse. My brother, who usually piles his plate high at family dinners, kept whispering that he was still hungry. My mom commented that the dishes were interesting but didn't taste like Christmas. My grandpa barely touched his food and kept looking at the door like he wanted to go home. Finally, when dessert was served, a delicate little holiday pastry, my grandma couldn't hold back anymore. She put down her fork and said, "I just don't understand. Christmas Eve has always been about gathering at home, cooking together, and eating as a family. This just doesn't feel like us." I felt a surge of frustration. I was just trying to make it more special. We do the same thing every year, and I thought this would be a nice change, something memorable. My mom looked at me sadly and said, "But it was already special. We don't need all this. We just wanted our family dinner, at home, with our own food. That's what makes it Christmas for us." After dinner, everyone was quiet on the ride back, and my grandparents, who usually stay up late to chat and laugh, went to bed as soon as we got home. The next day, my mom pulled me aside and said, "I know you wanted to do something nice, but sometimes traditions are special because they're simple. Next time, just ask before changing everything." Now, I'm wondering if I messed up. I thought I was doing something great for everyone, but they're all acting like I ruined Christmas Eve. I just wanted to make it memorable. So, My cousin Alex and I had this grand plan to organize a surprise 40th anniversary party for our grandparents. They're the heart of our family, and we'd grown up hearing all these amazing stories about how they met, their first date, and all the little adventures they've had over the years. We thought it'd be really special to surprise them with a party that would recreate some of those key moments, something nostalgic and meaningful. We decided to split the planning duties to make it easier on ourselves. Alex, who's super creative, volunteered to handle the decor, ambience, and invitations. I'd handle the catering, the cake, and the slideshow we'd planned to showcase old family photos and video clips. Alex got so into it, sending me ideas for decorations that matched the 80s theme we'd chosen, and I got busy gathering photos, tracking down family members for stories, and ordering the food. At least, that's how it started. But as the days went on, work got busy, and I assumed Alex had his side of things handled, so I didn't check in much. Every now and then, he'd text me some Pinterest idea for vintage table settings or how to make a homemade dance floor, and I'd throw in a nice or good idea, assuming he was fully on top of it. Meanwhile, I ended up ordering a catering package that was pretty basic, but figured it was more about getting people together than wowing everyone with food. I also threw together a quick slideshow in one night, using whatever pictures I had from my own albums. Not exactly the cinematic montage I'd imagined, but I figured people wouldn't mind. The day of the party, I arrived at the venue early with the food and my laptop for the slideshow, excited to see all of Alex's hard work. But when I walked in, my heart sank. There were a couple of balloons, the standard congratulations, kind you'd find in any store, a few wrinkled tablecloths, and a printed out happy anniversary banner taped to the wall, crookedly. No vintage decorations, no mood lighting, no dance floor like he talked about. The room felt like it was set up for an office potluck, not a once-in-a-lifetime anniversary party. Alex, I said as he came over, looking equally frazzled. Where's all the stuff you said you were doing? The ambience? The tables? This doesn't look anything like the ideas you showed me. He gave me a tight smile and shrugged. I didn't have time to get all the fancy stuff. I figured you'd help with setting up, just pitch in if you saw anything missing. I felt my stomach drop. What? I thought you were handling decor. That's why we split everything up. I didn't even think about decorations. He crossed his arms, looking frustrated. And where's the food? I thought you'd get some fancy catering, not these cheap deli trays. And I didn't even see the cake yet. I pointed toward the corner where the cake was, a simple sheet cake from a bakery that just said, "Happy 40th anniversary." Not exactly fancy, but I thought it'd be good enough. Apparently, he thought otherwise. This is what you got? You told me you'd handle it. I thought you'd at least get something custom. By now, guests were arriving, and I could see the disappointment on their faces as they walked in. A few people looked around the room like they were searching for the special touches we'd promised. My grandparents arrived, looking happy, but also a little puzzled, probably expecting something grander than a room that looked hastily thrown together. As people awkwardly sat down with their plates of basic sandwiches, Alex and I exchanged tense glances. He whispered to me, "I thought we were going to give them something amazing. I can't believe you cheaped out on everything." I shot back. "Are you serious right now? You were supposed to handle the decorations. I did my part. You're the one who didn't follow through." We ended up whispering angry remarks back and forth all night, each of us deflecting blame while trying to act normal in front of the family. The slideshow was underwhelming. The food ran out faster than expected, and the whole party was about as far from special as you could get. A few relatives made comments about how they miss the old family gatherings and how people don't put in as much effort these days. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, knowing our grandparents deserved way better than this. The once-in-a-lifetime anniversary party we planned ended up feeling like any other potluck, nothing more. Afterward, as we were cleaning up, Alex sighed and muttered, "I thought you'd take this more seriously." I couldn't hold it in. "Me? You're the one who flaked on literally everything. You talked so much about ambience and vibe, and this is all you brought." He just shook his head, clearly done with arguing, and muttered something about how next time he'd just do it himself. We ended up going our separate ways, each of us too frustrated to talk it out. Now, I can't help but wonder if maybe I should have put in more effort. But at the same time, I feel like Alex completely let me down. AITA? This time, it's about my grandma's 90th birthday. My family was planning a big celebration because, obviously, hitting 90 is a big deal. My mom and my aunt decided to throw a party at my parents' house, invite the whole extended family, and go all out. We're talking catered food, a slideshow, live music, everything. From the start, I knew they expected me to help, but I'd already made plans for that weekend to go on a road trip with some friends. It was the first time in months we'd all been able to coordinate schedules, and we'd booked a cabin a few hours away, planning to spend a few days hiking, fishing, just getting away from everything. When my mom called me to tell me about the party, I mentioned that I'd be away that weekend and probably couldn't make it. Her reaction was, well, let's just say it wasn't great. She went on about how Grandma's health isn't what it used to be, and how this could be the last big celebration we'd have with her. I felt guilty, obviously, but I didn't want to back out of my trip. I tried to explain that it wasn't like I didn't care. I just had plans that I couldn't cancel without letting everyone down. I told her I'd visit Grandma the weekend before, bring her flowers, spend some quality time with her, and make it special in my own way. I thought that was a reasonable compromise. But my mom? She was livid. She said, "You're making this about yourself. Your friends can wait, but your family is here now." She guilt-tripped me for a while, throwing out phrases like, "Family comes first and this could be your last birthday." I felt terrible, but I also felt like they were acting like I just bailed without a good reason. My mom wouldn't let it go, so I finally told her that I'd think about it, just to get off the phone. But in my head, I'd already decided to stick with my original plans. The week before the party, I went over to see Grandma, just like I said I would. We had lunch, I gave her a little gift, and we spent a nice afternoon together. She seemed happy enough and didn't ask anything about the party, so I figured I was in the clear. I thought that as long as I made the effort to see her, it'd show that I cared, even if I didn't make it to the big event. Well, the weekend came, and I went on my trip. My friends and I had a great time, completely unplugged and out in nature. I felt like I was finally getting a break, and honestly, I barely thought about the party at all. But when I got back, I could feel the storm brewing. My phone was full of missed calls and texts from family members, with my mom leading the charge. Apparently, everyone at the party kept asking where I was, and my mom had to keep making excuses, which she made sound like the most humiliating experience of her life. She told everyone I was too busy to be with my family, which only made things worse. My mom called and immediately laid into me. She told me that Grandma had noticed my absence and had asked about me, and that it had been heartbreaking to see her looking around the room for me and realizing I wasn't there. My mom said I was selfish, that I'd abandoned the family when it mattered most, and that I should have been there for my grandmother. She finished by saying, "I hope your trip was worth it." After that, even my aunts and cousins got in on the guilt trip. I got texts from family members saying things like, "I would have thought you'd prioritize your own grandmother's birthday over a weekend trip, and she's 90. How many more birthdays do you think she'll have?" They all acted like I'd done something unforgivable, and every attempt I made to explain myself just made things worse. No one cared that I'd spent time with her before the party, or that I had made an effort. All that mattered was that I hadn't been there on their schedule, and that was enough for them to treat me like I'd committed some huge betrayal. Now, I'm pretty much the family outcast. My mom barely speaks to me. My aunts keep bringing it up in the family group chat, and my cousins don't even try to hide the fact that they're judging me. Every time I try to defend myself, they just say, "You weren't there when it counted," like I'd skipped a major life event for no reason. I don't know, maybe I could have changed my plans, but it feels unfair that they're acting like the world revolves around this one party. I did spend time with Grandma. I showed that I cared, just not in the way they wanted. But now I'm wondering if I'm wrong for choosing my plans over the party, even though I thought I was doing the best I could. When my mom told me she'd sold her house and wanted to move in with me, I thought it was a joke. It had been her home for almost 30 years, the place where she raised me and my sisters, where we had every family holiday, every birthday, every Sunday spaghetti dinner. But here she was, saying it was too much upkeep and that it was time for her to downsize, which in her mind meant moving in with me. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you love that house. You could get someone to help with the yard work, maybe even think about hiring some help for the inside if that's what you're worried about." She just shook her head, her expression soft but resolute. "I've already made up my mind, honey. It's time to let go." and I thought this would be a chance for us to spend more time together. You're all I have left nearby." That last part hit hard. My sisters had moved out of state with families of their own, and I was the last one still close to home. I knew she was lonely, but this was a lot. My own space, my own life, suddenly colliding with my mom's in a way I hadn't anticipated. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. "Mom, you know I love you." I started carefully, trying to keep my voice gentle. "But this is a big step. I'm used to living alone. I've got my own routines, and I don't know. I'm worried it'll change things between us." She gave a soft, almost sad smile. "I get it, sweetie. I do. But I don't think it'll be as hard as you're imagining. I don't need much. Just a room and a little corner in the kitchen for my tea kettle. You'll hardly know I'm there." I wanted to believe her, but I could already picture the small disruptions, the loss of privacy, the inevitable adjustments we'd both have to make. My mom wasn't a high-maintenance person, but she had her ways, and I had mine. I could see her taking over little parts of my space. The living room, the TV, the kitchen, and our relationship slipping from comfortable to strained. "Mom, I don't know," I said finally, rubbing the back of my neck. I need to think about this. I don't want you to feel like you're imposing, and I also don't want to feel like we're both giving up too much." Her face fell a little, and she nodded slowly, a sadness settling in her eyes. "Of course, I don't want to push you into something you're not comfortable with. I just thought," she trailed off, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought we'd take care of each other, like family does." The guilt was immediate and sharp. She was right. We were family, and she'd been there for me in every way imaginable. When I went through a bad breakup, she was the one who stayed up late on the phone with me. When I was broke and fresh out of college, she was the one who helped with my rent until I got on my feet. But now, when she needed something, when she wanted to feel close to someone, I was hesitating. "It's not that I don't want to help you, Mom," I said, struggling to find the right words. I want us to stay close, and I'm scared that living together could change that. I don't want either of us to feel trapped or uncomfortable." She took a deep breath, nodding as she looked down at her hands. "I understand. I didn't mean to put you in this position. It's just after your dad passed, the house feels so empty. And I thought maybe you felt the same. Maybe we both needed a little company." Her words hit a nerve, and I felt the familiar pang of grief resurface. We'd lost Dad just a few years ago, and though I'd been doing my best to move forward, I knew the loss was still fresh for her. I remembered how she'd once talked about spending her retirement with him, how they'd planned to travel, to live their golden years together. Now she was alone, and I was the only family nearby, the only anchor she had left. "I know, Mom," I said, my voice softer now. "I know it's hard. I miss him too, and I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. I just need a little time to figure this out, okay?" She nodded again, but I could see the hurt there, the understanding that this wasn't the answer she'd been hoping for. "Of course, honey. You take all the time you need. I thought we'd be there for each other. But if this isn't what you want, I understand." We sat there in silence, the weight of our conversation settling heavily between us. I could feel her disappointment, and I knew that she'd see my hesitation as a rejection, as me choosing my independence over our family bond. And maybe, in a way, she wasn't wrong. I'd built a life here, a space that was mine, and I wasn't ready to give it up. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch as usual, but I could feel a distance growing. She didn't bring up moving in again, and I didn't ask. But every call ended a little quicker. Every conversation felt a little more strained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let her down in a way I couldn't fix. Then, one day, she called with an announcement. "I found a little apartment," she said, trying to keep her tone upbeat. "Just a place to start fresh, somewhere close to town." "Oh," I said, feeling a mixture of relief and regret. "That sounds nice. Do you need any help moving in?" She paused, then let out a soft chuckle. "No, honey, I've got it covered. But maybe you could come visit once I'm settled?" "Of course, Mom," I said, but the guilt settled in my chest, heavy and immovable. I knew this wasn't her first choice. I knew she wanted a chance to share a space, to bridge the distance that had grown between us since Dad passed. And I couldn't help but wonder if I'd let my own fears and need for independence push her away. Now, with her all moved into her apartment and our relationship feeling a little colder. I can't shake the question in my mind. I wanted to keep my life intact, my independence, but maybe in doing so, I'd broken something far more important. My girlfriend, Jenna, has been absolutely buried in work for months. She's been pulling crazy hours at her job, staying late at the office, and even working on weekends. Every time we talk, she seems exhausted, just completely drained. It's gotten to the point where she barely has any time to relax, and when she does, she's so tired she just falls asleep on the couch. She kept saying it was just a busy season at work, but honestly it's been months, and I could see it was taking a toll on her. So, I decided to do something special for her. I took a Friday off, booked us a little cabin up in the mountains for a weekend getaway, and even arranged for her boss to let her go early on that Friday. I wanted her to have a few days to just breathe away from work and stress, where she didn't have to do anything but relax. I planned out the whole weekend. Hiking trails, some quiet time by the lake, cozy dinners, and a bunch of her favorite snacks and wine. I figured she'd be thrilled. She was always talking about needing a break, and I thought this would be the perfect chance to reset. On that Friday, I showed up at her office with a huge grin, all ready to whisk her away. When she saw me standing there, she looked shocked, and not the good kind of shocked. "What are you doing here?" she asked, glancing around, clearly embarrassed. I told her all about the plan, about how I'd worked it out with her boss and everything, how I'd packed her bags with clothes and toiletries, so she didn't have to worry about a thing. I thought she'd be excited, but instead, she just sighed and looked away, like she was trying to keep herself calm. "Wait, so you talked to my boss about this?" she asked, her tone hard to read. "Yeah," I said, still trying to keep up my enthusiasm. "I figured it'd be a great surprise. You've been so stressed, and I thought this would be perfect for you to recharge." She looked down, biting her lip, and finally said, "You can't just decide stuff like this for me without asking. I had projects lined up, things I needed to finish before Monday, and now I'm going to have to scramble to catch up." I felt my heart sink. "Jenna, I was only trying to help. You've been saying for months that you're overwhelmed and exhausted. I just thought if I took care of all the details, you'd be able to relax." She shook her head, clearly frustrated. "I get that you meant well, but I can't just drop everything at work. And I don't appreciate you talking to my boss behind my back. It feels like you went over my head, like you don't trust me to know what's best for myself." That stung. All I wanted was to give her something nice, to show her that someone cared enough to take the weight off her shoulders, if only for a weekend. "Jenna, I thought this would help. I didn't mean to overstep. I just thought that maybe you needed a break, and I wanted to be the one to make it happen." She sighed, looking genuinely torn. "I know you were trying to do something nice, but I'm an adult. I don't need someone stepping in and making decisions about my life, even if it's out of love. This just makes me feel like you don't understand my responsibilities, and now I'm more stressed because of all the work I'll have to catch up on." I stood there, feeling deflated and embarrassed, realizing that what I'd thought was a grand gesture was actually more stressful for her. I wanted to protest, to explain that I only had the best intentions, but I could see it wouldn't help. I quietly told her I understood, apologized, and left, driving back with everything I'd planned sitting in the back seat. The whole thing has left me feeling awful, like I completely missed the mark. I wanted to be supportive, but somehow I ended up making her feel pressured and controlled. She's been distant ever since, and now I can't shake the feeling that I might have made things worse. My cousin Rachel and I have always been close, like sisters. She's a couple of years younger than me, and I've always felt this natural instinct to look out for her. Growing up, she was the more adventurous one, always chasing big dreams, making bold decisions, and never letting anyone hold her back. She's smart and capable, but she can also be a bit impulsive, diving headfirst into things without always thinking them through. A few months ago, she called me thrilled. She'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend, Mark, whom she'd been dating for just over a year. Now, Mark's a good guy, but even from the start, there were little things about their relationship that concerned me. They'd had some ups and downs, including a few pretty intense arguments that she confided in me about. She even stayed with me once after a fight, telling me he had a bit of a temper, but that he was working on it. Still, she insisted that they loved each other, that he was the one, and that everyone had issues they had to work through. When she told me they were engaged, I tried to put aside my concerns and be happy for her. After all, who was I to tell her what was best? She was glowing, talking about her wedding plans, their future together, the life they were going to build. I could tell she'd made up her mind, and I didn't want to rain on her parade. But as the wedding planning went on, Rachel started opening up to me about even more issues. She'd call me stressed, saying that Mark was controlling about the wedding details, getting into arguments over things as simple as which venue to choose or who she'd invite. I could hear the worry in her voice, and it sounded like she was second-guessing things. Still, she'd always end these calls by telling me how much she loved him and that she was just overthinking things. Then one night she called me in tears. They'd had another huge fight, and he'd given her an ultimatum about some decision related to the wedding, threatening to walk away if she didn't do things his way. I felt my heart twist hearing her so upset, and it took everything in me not to tell her to leave him. But I knew how much he wanted this relationship to work, so I tried to tread carefully. "Rachel, I don't want to upset you," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "But are you sure this is what you want? I know you love him, but it sounds like he's putting a lot of pressure on you, and that's not normal for an engagement." She was quiet on the other end, then sniffled. "What are you saying? That I should just call off the wedding?" "No, I'm not saying that," I replied quickly, feeling my stomach twist. "I just want you to think about what you really want and what makes you happy. This is supposed to be one of the happiest times of your life, but it sounds like it's stressing you out more than it should." Her voice turned sharp. "So, what, you think I'm making a mistake? You think I'm not strong enough to handle a little stress?" "No, Ratch, that's not it at all," I said, trying to stay calm. "You're incredibly strong, and I know you can handle anything. I just don't want you to feel like you have to change yourself to make this work. You deserve to feel loved and supported, not like you're constantly walking on eggshells." She let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe you're saying this. I thought you'd be supportive." "I am supportive," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. "But part of supporting you means making sure you're not compromising your happiness or well-being for someone else's sake. I just want to see you happy. That's all." "Well, maybe you don't know what's best for me," she snapped. "You're not the one in this relationship, and you don't get to tell me how to handle it." And with that, she hung up. I sat there, feeling both heartbroken and frustrated. I'd only wanted to help her see what I thought she was too close to recognize. But now, I'd managed to make her feel like I didn't trust her judgment, that I thought she couldn't make the right choices for herself. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind, wondering if I'd gone too far. For the next few weeks, things were tense between us. She stopped talking to me about the wedding and only shared surface-level updates. I wanted to reach out, to apologize or explain myself better, but every time I thought about it, I worried that I'd only make things worse. I felt guilty, like maybe I'd been too blunt, like maybe I should have just let her figure things out on her own. Then, a few days ago, she called me. She sounded exhausted, defeated. She told me that she and Mark had postponed the wedding. She admitted that they'd been fighting more than ever, and that she was questioning if they were really ready for marriage. She didn't say it, but I could tell that part of her was thinking about walking away. I told her that no matter what she decided, I'd be there for her, that I just wanted her to be happy and feel at peace. We talked for a long time, and I could tell that she was finally starting to see things more clearly. But I still felt this heavy guilt, like maybe my honesty had only made her feel more isolated when she needed someone to be in her corner. Now, we're slowly rebuilding our relationship, but there's still a part of me that wonders if I should have just kept my mouth shut. Maybe she needed to make her own mistakes, to learn things the hard way, and my interference only added to her stress. I wanted to protect her, to help her see what I saw, but maybe that was overstepping. So now I'm left here wondering, AITA? Shadow came into my life 12 years ago, a tiny, scruffy black kitten with wide green eyes and a meow that could melt anyone's heart. I found her huddled under my car one rainy morning, soaked and shivering. The moment I picked her up, she nuzzled into my arms like she'd found home, and I knew she was mine. Since then, she's been my constant companion, my friend, my family. She's been with me through breakups, career changes, even a move across the country. She's never left my side. But now Shadow was sick, really sick. I noticed her slowing down over the past few months, sleeping more, eating less. At first, I chalked it up to age, maybe a touch of arthritis. But then she started losing weight, and one night I found her hiding under the bed, breathing heavily. something she'd never done before. I rushed her to the vet, heart pounding with fear. The vet's face was somber as she explained the test results. Advanced kidney disease. We could try to manage it, she said, with a regimen of fluids, medications, maybe even some dialysis. It might buy her some time, but it won't cure her. How much time? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The vet hesitated. If she responds well, maybe a year, maybe a little more, but it's hard to say. Some cats adapt well, but others don't handle the treatments easily, especially at her age. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. The idea of saying goodbye to Shadow was something I'd never even let myself think about. She was still Shadow, still my girl, still greeting me with her soft purrs and curling up on my lap like she always had. I couldn't imagine life without her. But my partner, Alex, looked at Shadow with a gentle sadness, his hand resting on her small, fragile body. On the drive home, he finally spoke up, his voice low. Are you sure about putting her through all that? She's already so tired. I looked over at him, feeling a flash of frustration. She's still here, Alex. She's still got life in her. I can't just give up on her. He sighed, understanding but resolute. I know. I love her too, you know that. But this treatment? It'll be so hard on her, especially at her age. And she doesn't know why it's happening. To her, it'll just feel like pain. I shook my head, unwilling to hear it. I'm not ready to lose her, Alex. She's been with me through everything. I can't just let her go without trying. Alex reached over, putting a hand on my shoulder. I get it, but maybe the best thing we can do for her now is give her peace. Let her go with dignity, while she's still herself. I couldn't help but feel hurt, as if he was accusing me of being selfish. For the next few days, we barely spoke about it. Each of us stuck in our own thoughts. I spent hours researching treatments, reading about other cats with kidney disease, clinging to every story of survival and recovery. I showed Alex article after article, trying to convince him that Shadow had a chance, that she was still strong, that she could beat this if we gave her the chance. But he just listened quietly, nodding, his face still clouded with concern. I know you want to try, but I just don't want her to suffer. I don't want her last months to be filled with vet visits and needles and fear. Don't you think she deserves every chance? AITA. She's my family, Alex. I owe her that. Each time, he'd just nod, giving me the space to come to terms with the idea. But I could see he was already grieving, already preparing himself for what he believed was the inevitable. Finally, after another sleepless night, I asked him to come with me to talk to the vet again. Maybe I needed someone to help me see what I was so afraid to face. The vet explained each step of the treatment process, laying out the medications, the fluid injections, the possibility of dialysis. It can be done, she said kindly, and some cats adapt. But it can be stressful, and there are no guarantees. You have to ask yourselves if this is something she would want, or if it's something you want for her. Alex held my hand as we left the clinic, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we got home, we found Shadow curled up in her favorite spot by the window, her eyes closed, her body rising and falling in steady breaths. She looked so peaceful, so small, and I felt a wave of guilt and love crash over me. That night, as I sat with her, stroking her fur, she looked up at me with those familiar green eyes, and I could see that quiet trust there, that same trust she'd given me since the day I found her. It broke my heart to think of putting her through the treatments, forcing her to endure needles and pills and trips to the vet. She'd been my comfort, my anchor, and I wanted to honor her by letting her feel safe, not scared. The next morning, I made the hardest decision I'd ever had to make. I told Alex that I'd let her go, that I didn't want her last days to be filled with fear and pain. He wrapped his arms around me, whispering that I was brave, that she was lucky to have been loved so deeply. We spent her last days giving her all the love we could, sunny naps by the window, all the treats she wanted, long, quiet moments where she lay curled up in my lap. Each night, I'd second-guess myself, wondering if I was giving up too soon. But in my heart, I knew this was her time. On her last day, we held her close as the vet helped her pass peacefully. I whispered to her that she'd been the best friend I could ever ask for, that she'd given me so much joy, that she'd be with me always. She drifted away, her body finally at peace, her suffering over. Now, every corner of the house feels empty without her. I keep expecting to see her curled up in her favorite spots, to hear her soft purrs in the quiet hours of the night. I know I made the choice for her, that she's no longer hurting, but I can't help wondering if I gave up too soon, if maybe there was more I could have done. So I'm asking AITA for choosing to let her go, instead of holding on until the very... Alright, here's how my attempt at planning a surprise perfect day for my girlfriend, Sarah, turned into a bit of a disaster. Sarah's been super stressed lately. Work's been brutal for her, and she's mentioned a few times how she feels like she never gets a break. So, when her birthday was coming up, I decided to plan a full day of relaxation and pampering. In my head, it was exactly what she needed, a day to totally unwind, no work emails, no obligations, just pure bliss. I cleared my calendar, lined up a series of relaxing activities, and even booked us a fancy spa day. I kept the whole thing a surprise, thinking it would be amazing for her to just wake up and have everything planned out with no effort on her part. I made breakfast in bed, told her to dress comfortably, and teased that the day was going to be full of chill vibes and pure relaxation. She looked excited, and I thought, yes, this is going to be perfect. First up, we went to the spa, where I'd booked a couple's massage and facial. It was a nice place, serene, candles everywhere, soft music, the whole deal. I was ready to zen out, and I thought she would be too. But as we walked in, I noticed she seemed less enthusiastic. She thanked me, but I could tell she was a bit distracted, checking her phone and kind of glancing around the lobby like she was looking for something. I brushed it off, thinking she'd relax once the massage started. But during the whole session, I couldn't help but feel like she wasn't totally in the zone. Afterward, I asked if she was enjoying herself, and she just nodded, saying, "Yeah, it's nice, but I kind of thought we'd be doing something more exciting." That threw me. I'd gone all out for this relaxing day, because she'd been saying how exhausted she was. So I laughed and said, "This is exciting. Just wait. There's more to come." I figured she just needed a little time to get into the relaxation mode. Next, I took her to this cozy cafe I'd found, where I'd planned for us to have tea, pastries, and just a quiet, intimate vibe. I thought it'd be the perfect way to unwind after the spa. But halfway through, she kept checking her phone and finally sighed, saying, I was kind of hoping we'd be out with friends today. Like maybe brunch with everyone, or a party. This just doesn't feel like my birthday." At that point, I felt my stomach drop. All I'd heard for weeks was how stressed and burnout she was, and I thought a peaceful, relaxing day would be perfect. I explained, "I just thought you might want to get away from the usual noise, I wanted this to be about you and giving you a real break." She gave me a little smile, but I could tell she was disappointed. I get that, and it's sweet, but I like celebrating with people. A quiet day is nice, but birthdays are supposed to feel a little, lively. I felt like I'd totally misread her. But at this point, we were already halfway through the day, so I tried to salvage things by suggesting we go home, get dressed up, and hit one of her favorite bars that night. Maybe we could call a few friends to meet us there and turn the evening into something more her speed. She brightened up a bit at that, so I thought, okay, maybe I can save this after all. We got back to the apartment, and I scrambled to make some calls to her friends, trying to throw together last-minute plans. But as I was doing this, she sat down on the couch, sighed, and said, "Honestly, maybe we should just stay in. It's already late, and I'm not really in the mood anymore." Now I was really confused. Just an hour ago, she was saying she wanted to go out, but now it seemed like I'd completely killed the vibe by making the day too calm and quiet. She went to the bedroom to change in her comfy clothes, and I could tell she just wanted to stay in and call it a night. By then, I was feeling defeated. I went into the bedroom and apologized, saying I thought she'd wanted a day to unwind, and that I really just wanted her to feel special. She nodded and said, "I know. I wanted to feel celebrated, I guess I was expecting more of a party, not just a quiet day." We ended up watching a movie on the couch, both of us feeling a little awkward. I knew I'd tried, but I also felt like I'd failed to understand what would actually make her feel happy. I thought I'd done this thoughtful, perfect day for her, but in the end, I'd planned the day I thought she needed instead of the day she actually wanted. Now, I'm left wondering if maybe I was wrong to assume she needed relaxation when she was hinting she wanted something lively. I thought I was being thoughtful, but maybe I just missed the mark completely.